Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Museum of Science. So happy to see all of you here. This is the first in our winter-spring season of adult programs, or as we like to say, intelligent fun for adults. We are delighted to launch the series in conjunction with the opening of our new chocolate exhibit, which you'll be able to visit after we hear from tonight's special guest. Sarah Lohman got a summer job at her local Living History Museum when she was 16. Dressed in 19th century petticoats and corset, she churned butter, milked cows, and cooked food in the way that her character would have 150 years ago. She didn't know it then, but it was the beginning of a lifelong adventure exploring forgotten recipes, finding unusual ingredients, and preparing dishes that were originally served centuries ago. Today, Sarah is a recognized historic gastronomist. Following the release of her new book, 8 Flavors, The Untold Story of American Cuisine, she's here to take us on a unique journey through our past, relating true stories of the flavors that Sarah believes changed how we eat. Last spring, some of you may have been here for our live gastropod event. Sarah was a highlight of the program. She lit up the stage with her spicy personality, and you are in for a real treat. So please help me give her a warm welcome to Sarah Lohman.
Good evening, everybody. I wanted to start here because I just really like this setup. It's as though I've invited you over for an intimate occasion, just you and me. Just gonna have a chat about some food history. So, oh good, I can see you. Welcome, welcome everyone. Welcome to my home, thank you. So let's be real for a second, because I'm gonna put this whole next hour of your life in a little bit of context. The election didn't go how I would have liked it to. In fact, the past 2 weeks of my life have been anxious, as I think would be maybe the understatement of this week. And this whole thing is definitely not going how I planned. And actually, it is not the world that I planned to release this book into. So this book, 8 Flavors, The Untold Story of American Cuisine, on one hand, looks at 8 flavors that I consider very typical of American cooking, uses these 8 ingredients as a way to define this often very difficult to define cuisine of American cuisine. But the book, even though it is to an extent about the ingredients, the botany, and the chemistry behind why we like them, it's much more importantly about the people who brought these flavors to this country, who cooked with this food, who made America. The book paints a more diverse portrait of what an American is. And I thought that this book was going to come out in a world that was already pro-diversity. And I was just going to give it a cute little nudge a little further on. I did not expect to be talking about this book in the wake of a ban on refugees, and in the wake of building a wall with Mexico, which, by the way, the entire Southwest used to be Mexico. We took it. Like someone was like, right, yes, that's history. So all of that is in this book too. And I guess I want to start with a reading, since I've got this nice living room / Italian restaurant set up here to share with you. Just a paragraph from my introduction. Introducing these 8 flavors that I picked, which I want to say right off are not the only 8 flavors of American cooking. I've gotten, I joke that my #1 question is, what about cinnamon? Which I admit is a valid question and a valid point. I guess the digression on that is that we loved cinnamon before we became a country, and I wanted to focus on the past 200 years post-revolution. So there will be an upcoming blog post on my blog, 4 Pounds Flour, titled, What About Cinnamon? And it will explain everything about cinnamon that is not in this book. And I guess the only other thing that I'll put in the forefront is that coffee and chocolate I also think are two very significant flavors in our history, but there are already books that are really excellent that are written about those two flavors. There's pages and pages of research about them. So I wanted to talk about flavors that are typically American, but that have not been given as much airtime. And more importantly than the people behind those flavors. So who are these people? At the end of the day, the study of culinary history isn't about food. It's about the people who prepare and consume this food. The individuals who brought these flavors to America's table don't usually get a page in the history books. We have black pepper because of enterprising New England merchants who treated the indigenous people of Sumatra with respect. Vanilla is here thanks to a 12-year-old slave who figured out a botanical secret no one else knew. Chili powder, spread across the country because of entrepreneurial Texan-Mexican women who fed soldiers and tourists, and a clever German immigrant who was looking for a culinary shortcut. Curry powder's popularity was due to sailors craving flavors they had tasted in the Far East, but also because of America's first Indian chef, who, by the way, was also Muslim. Soy sauce came thanks to immigrants from China, although we started using it more broadly because of the Japanese, and garlic thanks to immigrants from Italy, although we started using it more broadly because of the influence of French cuisine. MSG was discovered in a homemade soup by an inquisitive Japanese scientist, and sriracha was created by a refugee from Vietnam as a sauce for pho. Each flavor became American as a result of three main factors: an event that created the desire for each flavor, followed by increased availability, paired with a biological preference. This book tells the stories of these flavors, the stories of the people behind them, and consequently the story of our country. You can find these 8 flavors from kitchens from New York to California, used by families whose ancestors came from everywhere, from Italy to Vietnam. And through these 8 flavors, I learned that American food has a complicated, continuously evolving identity, just like Americans themselves. Thank you. Wow. Good night, everybody. Thanks for coming. That's all I got. No, thank you a lot, because obviously I find what's happening upsetting, and the point of this book is that I do want us to identify American as not just meaning white, to be honest, that there is a long history of people of every color from every place also making homes in this country and contributing to our culture. And often, a lot of these stories are bittersweet. There was actually a review in the Christian Science Monitor of all places who called these stories sometimes inspiring and sometimes shameful because of what our country has done in the past and now currently in the present. So what we're going to do tonight is we're going to explore the flavors of 2 of these chapters. The first one being about black pepper. And I will admit the black pepper chapter is largely about white men, but they're really nice white guys. So I think they deserve a little bit of airtime too. And then we're going to explore the second chapter of my book, Vanilla. Each of these flavors are placed chronologically as to when they became I don't want to say steady part, a permanent part of our American pantries. And then, as a special feature tonight, we are going to talk about chocolate, which is also a major, major, major part of the American diet, because then after this, while I'm signing books, you all get to take a look at the chocolate exhibit, which just opened up on Saturday. It's presented in part with the Field Museum of Chicago, and word on the street is there's going to be free chocolate down there, too. Night gets better and better. 2 applause rounds already. Okay. So a little bit of botany first. This is what black pepper looks like when it's at home, when it's not in your home, when it's in its home. And this is a black pepper plantation. They come in different varieties. These bundles of vines that are climbing up these tree trunks there, that's what a black pepper plant looks like. It is a very, very lush vine. And plantations can either be fairly natural, like this, incorporated with the jungle, or they can be very, very orderly with the black pepper growing up posts. All of our pepper colors, let's say, all come from the same plant. It just depends on when they're harvested. These are pepper spikes. They flower, little light green or white flowers that eventually, when they're pollinated, fruit and turn into these little, well, fruits. They're little tiny berries. That's what we're eating. This is what they look like when they're unripe, and a green peppercorn is a modern invention. It is these berries that have been harvested and freeze-dried, and that's how they come to you. They ripen from yellow to red, and as black pepper ripens, the aromatics increase and the spiciness decreases. The spiciness is from a chemical called piperin, which is in the same family as capsaicin. So even though we don't think of pepper as being hot, it is, sorry if I smack this thing here, I forget that it's there, and I'm very energetic, as you can see. Black pepper triggers those same receptors that also are triggered by capsaicin. So, and if you don't think black pepper is hot, go home and chomp down on a peppercorn and you will have a different opinion after that. Speaking of gastropod, we did an episode about the book, and in the book I write about doing a black pepper tasting, which was a bad idea in the first place, but Nicola and Cynthia of Gastropod got really excited about the idea and made me do it again. And I was like, I cannot believe we're doing this. And by the end, they were in tears from trying. They sent me like 9 different types of black pepper. I'm like, we're not getting through all these. They didn't believe me is the end of the story. So as it ripens, it turns red. Black pepper is harvested somewhere in the middle. All the berries don't ripen at the same time. So it's harvested when maybe only a few are red and most are yellow and some are green. And that seems to be the best balance of aromatics and piperin, that spicy chemical. So there's our black peppercorn in the middle. Now you look at it, you can see it is a little dried fruit. And white pepper, which is next to it, is just the seed of that fruit with the skin and the dried pulp all removed. And white peppercorn is harvested when the berry is almost fully ripe. The thought is that since it's just the seed, they want the flavors to be the most developed. But interestingly, it is also fermented. Traditionally in running water, which apparently is still done, a lot of black pepper is still harvested by hand, which is a lot of the most expensive spices in the world are still processed by hand. Chocolate is also still largely processed by hand too. So we're throwing it in some water, or we've got these more sort of controlled environments there. But that's why if you take a big whiff of white pepper, it smells a little bit like stinky feet. It's from bacterial developing during this fermentation process that then the husks are rubbed off and then it's packaged. Yeah, I don't like the foot smell. Or like a cheese, like a nice cheese. And that's personal. I'm not here to I hope no one from the white pepper board is here. I'm not knocking it. Red peppercorns, not peppercorns. They are from an unrelated shrub called festive leaf Florida holly or Christmas berry. These, you might remember in the 90s, were very expensive and prized by chefs, and they were being bought from one company that was selling them from the Canary Islands, and it was like, this is only from the Canary Islands. And then actually a botanist got curious and was like, what exactly are red/pink peppercorns? What are these? And she sent samples out to botanical gardens around the world. Turns out it's an invasive shrub in Florida, and it is literally growing in ditches, and New York restaurateurs were paying an arm and a leg for it. So the bottom fell out of the red peppercorn market at that point. There's nothing wrong with it. It's not a villain because it's not pepper. It has a peppery flavor and it rounds out a spice blend nicely. And actually fully ripe fresh peppercorns are used in the parts of the world where pepper is grown as a condiment, but I've never seen them anywhere in the West, not even pickled, which is also a product that's sold. So there's a little bit of botany for you. So where are the parts of the world where pepper is from? It is native to the Malabar coast of India. When we first started importing pepper, it comes from Sumatra. So it's coming largely from Indonesia, specifically from the northwest coast of Sumatra. When we were a colony, most of our goods were coming from Britain. And that's how Britain wanted it, right? And that's why all y'all threw a lot of tea in the harbor. Because we were mad about that, because Britain was charging an arm and a leg for all the commodities that we had to buy from them. And part of the way that they were maintaining this stranglehold on us is that they were keeping the sources of their products secret. I mean, they were also, it was illegal for us to go to these places ourselves. We were required to trade with England, but we wouldn't even know where to go if we wanted it until So revolution happens. We get a lot of merchants in Salem who make a lot of money, essentially being pirates during the revolution. And when the revolution is over, they're looking to expand their interests because one of the side effects of our revolt was now we didn't have any stuff anymore. Like no one was bringing us stuff. So we had to do this ourselves, except we didn't know where stuff came from. So we didn't know where stuff came from. One day, there is an expedition to Indonesia to collect different spices. They're trading for different items, trading for locally produced silk. And the captain of that expedition gets a hot tip that black pepper is grown in Sumatra. I'm paraphrasing, but only a little bit. He comes back to Salem, and he says to an investor, I know where black pepper is, fund my trip. And that trip is funded. The ship is called the RAJAH. It is the first trip to leave from Salem, from America, really, go around the world and end up in Sumatra. And it leaves in 1795, comes back within a year, and the accounts of it say that it had black pepper shoveled into its hold like gravel. The pepper it brought back sold for $700,000. That's in 1795 money. Consider for a moment that the average man made $1 a day in 1795. So the Carnes family, who funded this voyage, they wanted to keep this location on lockdown, but someone spilled the beans. It is lost to history who, but it is, the location is heard about by a family named the Crowninshields. This is a painting of their wharf at its busiest. Their in-laws' wharf still exists in Salem. You can walk down Derby Wharf, and they were another very, very powerful family from the same time period. The Crowninshields have a really grumpy dad named George, and he has 5 sons that he all forces to go into sailing. George had been sailing since he was 11, and some of his sons took to sea voyages better than others. They hear about the location of pepper, and so in 1801, they fund a voyage on the America III to go find it. And he sends his son John, who at this point is 30 years old and is supposed to be good looking. So the descriptions say he's supposed to be very handsome at 30. And what's so interesting about this family, even though they weren't the first to go, John keeps a ship's log and a journal, which we still have. It's in the collection of the Peabody Essex Library. So one of the things that is truly remarkable about this journal is it has what you'd expect, like we left on this day, rained on this day, we showed up, we found some pepper. So when I know. All right, it was probably pretty amazing, but interestingly, that part of him like arriving and finding pepper, he's just like, yeah, it happened. We didn't like the price at the first place. We went to the second port. So they go to 3 different ports and they make a deal with the local people. The ACEHNESE is who they're called. And if you when you strike a deal, you put a handful of peppercorns and the agreed upon amount into a handkerchief together. They were paying $8 for a picule, which is 133 pounds of pepper. The British were paying about half that. So they were also, you just have to read the book. We don't have the time today. The British were keeping the locals in poverty, as the British do, and like we're colonizing them and like da. So right away we come and we're like, we're going to pay you twice as much for the same product. And the ACEHNESE are like, oh yeah, yes, we'll trade with you. And then when you're waiting for your ship to get filled up with pepper, it can take a while. It takes about a month at least. Some ships had to stay for another growing season, which was like 3 or 4 months. They're there for about a month. So what do they do in this time? According to John's journal, he hangs out with the ACEHNESE. And what is remarkable about his papers is that he talks about how much he likes these local people. That is uncommon for 1801, for a white guy, especially. Because we were the colonizers, right? We were the ones that were going to go out there and we're going to show all the brown people God and how it's done and how to be modern and how not to be who they are. And instead, John shows up and he's like, again, paraphrasing, but not that far from the original. He's like, man, these people are really nice. I really like them. And when it was all said and done, and they were finishing up their deal and they untagged the handkerchief with the money and the peppercorns, he was like, you know, I heard you guys were like really mean, and that's why Americans haven't been here before. And the ACEHNESE were actually like, really? And to be fair, these are like full-grown men with swords, like really vicious-looking swords, and they were like, really? And I go, well, we hope you didn't believe any of that. And he's like, John says, well, I think it's actually something the British said to keep us away. But you know what? I don't believe any of that anymore. I think that you're really nice. And the ACEHNESE said, you know, between two peoples who are as different as you and I, there are bound to be misunderstandings. And they parted ways, and everybody was happy. I know. This is like the opposite of any story you hear ever. Like, when I read this, and I'm like, you mean everyone was just nice to each other? And then it doesn't end here. So they become like the kings of pepper. They refer to Sumatra as their pepper gardens. And the family literally becomes millionaires, again, in early 19th century money, from just selling pepper to a market that had no other options. But the other traders who then figure out where the pepper is and follow in their footsteps, they follow in their footsteps another way in that they continue to be nice. So maybe this was just business, right? We can just look at this and say, well, they're trying to make money. It worked for the Crown and Shield, so other people are going to follow suit. My reaction to that is, great, great. What a nice policy for dealing with people and making money. Be nice to each other. And they won because of it. Trying to think of, so these are the ACEHNESE, which to this day, pepper is still grown in that region. They are still the major pepper farmers in Sumatra. The variety that comes from Sumatra, which I believe is Lampong, is one of the most popular in America. It is, I consider, the hottest, like it has the highest piperine content of any of the peppers. And Americans tend to like really bold flavors like that. We like the biggest punch. So it's a good, the moral of the story is be nice. I don't even know how many times I can say it. The moral of the story is be nice. And we totally beat the British. Within 40 years, we were monopolizing the pepper trade. And whereas the English had controlled maybe 80% of the plantations on Sumatra before, by 1854, we're in their control, which was like less than 5%. So we really stuck to the British. Sorry if you're English. It's nothing personal. This is old history. We've all made some mistakes, believe me. So that's a little in summary of the first chapter of my book. I want to talk now about vanilla, which if you didn't know, was actually an orchid. This is an artist rendering of it, but we'll be looking at a photo of it in just a minute too. So where are we going to start on this? Oh, Pangea. We're going to start way back. So one of the things I find truly fascinating about vanilla orchids is that there are over 100 different varieties of not just orchids, but vanilla orchids, and they're on 4 different continents. And what that means when you have a plant that is spread over the world like that is that it is a very, very old plant. So orchids, vanilla orchids specifically, existed before the continents divided. We can date it through botanical history going all the way back to Pangea. So we're talking, well, a very long time ago. It's been around a long time. However, there are only about 25 species of edible vanilla. That is a vanilla orchid that produces a seed pod that is extremely odorous and has a lovely taste to it. And those all come from right there. They're native mostly to Mexico, but sort of down into Bolivia, like Central America right there as well. So it is a Native American plant. That's what it looks like when it's at home. This is it on a plantation, and there's 2 types of plantations to this day. One of the models that's being experimented with, particularly in Mexico, is vanilla vines are trained up of, this is a orange tree, but other citrus trees too. In some cases, a new business model they want to start is they want to train them up chocolate trees, which are also indigenous to Central America. And in another business model, they want to have a chocolate tree with a vanilla vine and the black pepper vine, because you harvest them all at different times. So that means for the farmers, they've always got profits coming in, especially because each of those take a couple years to become fruitful, to begin to produce. So this is one type of plantation. This is another one. They're actually not that far apart. This is the Gaia plantation in Mexico. It is currently the largest vanilla plantation. It's in Pampantla, Mexico, which is in Veracruz, which is on the Gulf Coast. And they are doing a lot of experiments with humidity, temperature, shade, to see under what conditions the vanilla vines grow the best. But they work with plantations like this. This is also essentially theirs, but it's independently owned by local farmers. But the farmers grow the beans and then sell them to the Gaias for a set price. It does not vary year to year. So if they have a bad year, the Gaias take the hit. They're essentially salaried employees, even though they have their own farm. That's really important, and we'll get to why a little bit later on. So the vanilla is an orchid flower, as you saw in the drawing, and when it is pollinated, it grows into this big green bean. The pollination occurs in March. The beans then ripen for about 9 months. There's all sorts of weird parallels to people. When the flower is pollinated, it's called the marriage. It's all, yeah, very, very human. And then they get cured. First, they're killed. The Gaias use a steam to kill the development, to kill the ripening. And then they're cured in the sun for, it depends, 4 to 6 weeks. It depends on how sunny and hot it is, essentially. And this process is important because those green beans don't smell like vanilla at all. About 1/3 of our aromatic and flavor experience of a vanilla bean comes from a chemical called vanillin. And vanillin occurs when chemicals that are in the skin of the vanilla bean meet chemicals that are in the middle of the vanilla bean. And that can only happen when those cell walls start getting broken down in the steaming and curing process. So at the end of this process, in the words of Norma Gaia, who runs the plantation, she says that people who are just driving by are like, what's that smell? Like, it's just everywhere after it's cured and has come to this state. And this is a fully cured vanilla bean, and the white crystals that you see on the outside of this, that is vanillin. Vanillin is also the chemical that is artificial vanilla. It is the same chemical, it just comes from different sources. And a vanilla bean has over 200 different flavor components, whereas artificial vanilla has just the one. That white powder right there, vanillin. And it is just much cheaper to get it from sources other than this. About 95% of vanilla used in the world is artificially manufactured. It is impossible to be able to grow enough vanilla to meet our demand for it. And there's even a place to use artificial vanilla in your kitchen very, very effectively, but you got to buy the book for that one. It's at least worth the price. This one tip. With this one tip, you will save enough money that the book will buy itself back in a year. I'm not even exaggerating. So the reason that we love vanilla, and it is a part of our culture, has to do with 2 brilliant young black men. And the first is James Hemings. And I don't have a picture of him because there isn't one, because James Heming was a slave. And it was very, very rare that there were any portraits done of any slaves ever. What we do have, though, is equally remarkable. This is a document that is written in his hand. He could indeed read and write. The Hemings family, you might have heard that name before, belonged to Thomas Jefferson's wife. Sally Hemings is probably the most infamous. She bore several children to Jefferson. But what a lot of people don't know is that Sally Hemings was a half-sister to Jefferson's wife, Martha. They had the same father. This family had a lot of prestige within both Martha's family and then within the Jeffersons, which allowed them to, manipulate's a strong word, it allowed them certain privileges over the people that they were also enslaved with. And one of them was that they were educated. Not only were they educated, but this family was in fact brilliant. They were extremely gifted, which makes much of their story that much more tragic. What this is a list of items in Monticello's kitchen. Because when Hemings was a young man, and the exact years slipped my mind now, he was 30 or 32, he was able to negotiate for his freedom. And before he left, one of the things he did was get everything in order, and this is one of the documents we have from that time. It's remarkable to have this history from a black man in the 19th century. He went to France with Jefferson. Jefferson left to be our ambassador to France right after the Revolutionary War, and he took Sally and her brother James with him. James, while in France, learned how to speak and write in French. He was also apprenticed under a pastry chef and a chef de cuisine, and he graduated from culinary school in France. He became a certified chef de cuisine, I think in an attempt because Jefferson was just really a Francophile. And he knew he was going to go back to Monticello, which is this paradise he was building for himself, but he also knew that this paradise was in the middle of nowhere. Not to mention America, which part of, when Franklin was there at the same time, part of him wearing that like coonskin cap was to play into our like rowdy, backwoods American identity. Jefferson kind of went the opposite. He wanted to bring France home with him. And one of the ways he did that was meticulously documented recipes. We have about 12 recipes in his hand that he brought back from France, as well as take his slave with him and train him to be a French chef. Now, France was a free country. It was not a slave-holding country. Their colonies were at this point, but France was not. So when Jefferson brought Sally and James into France, they were free. He had to pay them, which he did. And then when it came time to go home, they said, you know what, we're going to have a talk about this. Because they could have stayed. They could have stayed there together, been free, and probably would have been treated with more respect than they were treated back in America. However, their entire family, everyone they knew and loved, was back in the States, back in Monticello. So who knows what conversation Sally and James had, how they came to this decision. But they decided they wanted to go back home, but said they only would go back home if, in Sally's case, her children would be free, not enslaved. And James said, I'll come back if I can train someone to take over for me, and then you set me free. Which is how, as a young man, he gained his freedom. This recipe is in Jefferson's hand, and it is his recipe for vanilla ice cream. Now, Jefferson didn't invent vanilla ice cream. He may not have even been the first person to eat it in this country, but he was probably one of the first. And vanilla, even though it was the most popular flavor of ice cream, was the most expensive and the most rare. Because all the vanilla was being produced in Mexico. Mexico was owned by Spain. So vanilla beans went from Mexico to Spain and then back to America. So they cost a pretty penny at that point. This recipe is essentially like how we'd make a custard vanilla ice cream today. Other than a little bit of language differences, it's basically the same thing. So even though this is in Jefferson's hand, it probably would have been Hemings that would have been executing this and teaching others about it in his kitchen. Jefferson is a big trendsetter, both in his home at Monticello and then, of course, when he becomes president, in which we have documented instances of him serving ice cream. And actually, when he becomes president, he invites, well, that's not what James thought of it. James felt that he was ordered to come to the White House. And at this point, James is a free man. He was having trouble finding work. He was working in a tavern. Didn't matter how talented or brilliant he was a free black man in what was a slave country. Jefferson summons him. Hemings doesn't like the way Jefferson is talking to him, so they have like a little through a mutual third party. And he ends up not going to Monticello, but the following summer, he ends up not going to the White House, but the following summer he ends up working at Monticello. At the end of the summer, when Jefferson goes back to the White House, he's given his money, he's let go, and within 2 months he's committed suicide. Jefferson called it a tragical end. Now, I can't say why. We don't have letters, we don't have documents saying exactly why Hemings made this decision. All we know is that he was extremely gifted. And he went out into a world that had no interest in him and who he was because of the color of his skin. This is just to note that it is the French who are the people that really made vanilla an ingredient of its own. Because vanilla came to Europe with chocolate. We think of them as opposites, but it was the drink of chocolate we'll get to a little bit later that was flavored with vanilla that went to Europe. And it's probably in a custard like this that the French first started using vanilla alone, and this is creme brulee. And if you put the custard in the oven, it's creme brulee. If you put it in an ice cream maker, it's ice cream. It's sort of the same process. So they were very invested in the idea of smuggling vanilla vines out of Mexico and figuring out how to grow them somewhere else. And one of the places they took them was to their colonies here. Madagascar, Réunion, and Seychelles is not on this map. Or I actually just think it's maybe too tiny for it to be on this map. There was a plantation owner on Réunion, which although France was not a slave country, their colonies were. He had a plantation, and he was an amateur botanist. He'd kept the vanilla vine alive on his plantation for 20 years, but the thing would flower, but it would never fruit. It wouldn't pollinate. And at this point, we're now talking the 1830s, and we have a sense of what that means. It means that in Mexico, there were native pollinators that were pollinating the flowers that didn't exist here in Réunion. So what to do? The plantation owner, his name is Bellier Bonbon. He has a slave named Edmond. Edmond is 12. And Edmond is also extremely brilliant. And it's difficult to know who noticed this about him first, but Bellier Bonbon really took him under his wing. And he was making the rounds of the plantation, looking at the botanical specimens, working on problems with his master. And one day, so the story goes, the two were walking the plantation together, and the master, Bellier Bonbon, looked at the vanilla vine and saw that a flower had turned into a fruit. And he looked at Edmond and said, "How did this happen?" And Edmond said, "I did it." He was 12. It was 1842. He figured out the technique of hand pollination that is still used around the world to this very day. It was a remarkable accomplishment and the reason that we know his name when so many other men's and women's names have been forgotten. Bellier Bonbon, to his credit, advocated around the world, saying the discovery was not his. He did not try to take credit for it. He said that it was totally independent, that Edmond had not been doing any reading. He figured it out himself and invited other plantation owners from the area to come and watch his technique so they could replicate it. In Edmond's lifetime, he lived into his early 50s, he watched the cash crop of his home island go from sugarcane to vanilla. This drawing interestingly is by Robert Krulwich, who did a blog post about Edmond. I don't think it's exact to the numbers, but it's fairly reasonable. So 41, 42 is when the discovery happens. So we're looking at really within 25 years, the vanilla industry has exploded. Edmond also gains his freedom in 1848. The whole island becomes free in 1848, but he gains his freedom about 6 months earlier. This is him when he's in his late 30s, early 40s, looking like just amazing, super funky, and I really like it. And it's taken from a drawing that was in an encyclopedia of the history of the island of Réunion. Réunion, by the way, it swapped names around the same time that slavery was abolished, and it used to be called Ile de Bourbon. So when you buy bourbon, French bourbon vanilla, that is a name that indicates that it's vanilla that comes from this part of the world, Réunion, Madagascar, or Seychelles. Edmond gained his freedom and went into the city of Saint-Denis away from the plantation, and much like James Hemings, had difficulty finding work and ended up doing hard labor. And he was arrested at some point too, for reasons that have sort of been lost to time. He was involved in a robbery, served 3 years in prison before advocacy from his master got him released. For about the last 10 to 15 years of his life, he lived on a part of the plantation that he had tried to leave, that he had gained his freedom from, where he died at the age of 51. And the local newspaper said that it was a sad and destitute end. So this is what I mean when I say these stories are bittersweet, when they are sometimes inspiring and sometimes shameful. In a way, it's a gift that we get to know the names of these two men, but in a way, we took from them their contributions and really gave them nothing in return. And now I bring it down a little bit, but it really bums me out. Vanilla, as I mentioned, came to Europe with chocolate. They were one and the same. They were tied together. Chocolate recipes to this day often include just a little bit of vanilla in them. So I'm going to tell you a little bit now about another major American flavor, although not one I cover in the book. So this is like a little bonus right now. And that is chocolate. which, as I mentioned already, is native not only to Central America, but also to sort of the top part of South America there. This is where the tree is from, and it is a tree. That is the tree, but a cool part of the exhibit that you're going to see downstairs is when you walk in, there is a replica of a cacao tree right there. And it's cool to me to see because these trees don't fruit like other trees do. It's not like an apple where it comes off the tip of a branch. These pods are its fruits, and they just like pop right out the side of the tree. And that was so bizarre that when the first European colonizers came here and came home and then described those trees and said this is what they look like, the botanical drawings were like, oh no, they must be mistaken, and like drew them like apple trees, but they were wrong. They just assumed that these guys didn't know what they're talking about. This is what the tree looks like. They are often grown in plantations in the jungle because the flowers of the tree are pollinated by little midges that live in the sort of rotting first layer of forest debris. The way the flowers come out is called caulifloria, meaning that there are many that sort of come out of one spindle, sometimes thousands, and out of those thousands, between 1% and 5% of the flowers pollinate and get turned into fruits. That is what the pod looks like up close, these big football-looking things. They get hacked off the trees and split open, and that's what it's like inside. It's covered in this pulp. It's like a pulpy fruit. I've gotten to taste it once, not fresh, because you can't import it fresh. As soon as you hack that thing open, it starts to ferment. The bacteria, the sugar, and that's important to the maturation of the chocolate, but it means that the fruit really doesn't travel. You can get it frozen. If you're ever in San Francisco, there's a chocolate company out there in the ferry terminal that serves smoothies made with cacao fruit. Doesn't taste like chocolate. It tastes kind of bright and citrusy and fruity. So in the middle of those are little black cacao beans. And this fruit is scooped out and it's piled up. You also see a replica of this downstairs too, and it's left in these piles to ferment for a couple days. That helps not only to mature the flavor, but also then the goopy, pulpy fruit kind of rots away. And then the seeds are pulled out of the middle, and they're first dried, and then they're roasted. More and more companies are roasting the cacao beans themselves, the bean-to-bar process. Not only are they roasting the cacao beans themselves, but more chocolate companies are becoming directly involved with the cacao plantations, because there are a lot of ethics questions involved in chocolate. You've probably heard some of the news, too. There's a lot of questions of a lot of chocolate comes from West Africa. There's a lot of accusations that major chocolate companies are working with plantations that use child labor and in some cases slave labor. So to avoid those ethical issues and really to make a better, higher quality product, smaller companies are working directly with plantations, often in the original zone of Central America and South America too. A lot are coming out of Belize, but many other places too. And then they buy from the growers direct, roast them themselves, and they get an artisanal product, I would say. That's what it looks like after it's roasted. It has this papery shell that you can rub away. Inside, that's what gets turned into chocolate. They're called cacao nibs when they're in this state. And after they're roasted, they're then ground. You'll see this downstairs too. This is the traditional way to grind it on a metate that's specific. Metates are also used for grinding corn. This is specific to cacao because you also put a heat source underneath. So you're grinding and heating it, and then that turns it into liquid chocolate. The first people to cultivate chocolate were the Maya in this time period, from about 250 to 900 AD. And we know this for a really cool reason, too. If you've ever been to the Yucatan, you've probably done something like cool and touristy in one of these. Like you can swim in them, you can do whatever. This is a cenote. And a cenote is a place in the Yucatan where the limestone surface has broken through and it reveals underground water. Now, the Yucatan is quite arid, but in these cenotes, there are many tropical environments. The Maya were very powerful, and their empire expanded well beyond the Yucatan. They would go into the jungle, the rainforest environments of Central America, and take back interesting plants and plant them in these cenotes, in these sort of agricultural pleasure gardens. In these cenotes, not me, I had nothing to do with it. I have found nothing in cenotes. Scientists who work very hard and graduate students and professors went to these cenotes and cataloged the plants. UC Davis is the university that did this, and they found cacao trees, which are not native to the Yucatan, as well as vanilla vines. So not only were they importing cacao because they liked it, but they brought the things with the cacao that were used to flavor it. We think of chocolate mostly in bar form today, but for 99% of its history, it was a liquid. This is a drawing of a Maya woman, and she is making chocolate. The Maya liked to drink their chocolate hot. They would grind and heat the cacao nibs. They would mix it with water, and then they would froth it by pouring it between these two vessels. If you're curious, I mentioned my blog before, 4 pounds flour. I tried this recipe, including this, and you can probably already guess what happened. It was all over my kitchen floor. I thought it was gonna look all cool like her. Didn't happen. I believe this is a depiction of a woman making it in a market. It was common to buy it in markets. It was often flavored with things like vanilla, honey, chili peppers, and other spices from Central America that are really sort of unknown to us here, unknown to Westerners, essentially, outside of these cultures. And that's what it looks like when you do it right. But the interesting thing, which I got there eventually, I put it in a jug and shook it. That was my solution. But also one of the problems I ran into is that I found that my froth didn't stick. And froth comes from protein. When you're making whipped cream or you're making meringue, that is protein that is sort of hooking itself together. So I really didn't get mine to look how it should until I added an egg, which was something that they did. It is indigenous. They could have used birds' eggs. Later on recipes add ground almonds, but those are not indigenous. That comes after Spain, as does dairy. So it needs some sort of protein in there, and it's a little bit of a question as to what they might have used to get it to froth like that. And this drink, even though sometimes it was flavored with honey, was not a particularly sweet drink. This is much more bitter, like coffee, and has the same sort of invigorating effect too. I didn't like it at first because I anticipated what I'm used to, creamy, sweet, things like this, but then like the more I drank it, I got behind it. You know, it's like coffee. If you're a coffee drinker, you'd probably like this drink. It comes to Europe after the conquistadors go to Mesoamerica. The Aztecs were big chocolate drinkers too, and they were the dominant culture when the conquerors started showing up in the middle of the 16th century. Pretty soon after, the people who are colonizing are intermarrying with local populations and or hiring them to work in their homes, and that's how chocolate gets introduced to Westerners, through either housemaids or wives. Interestingly, a monk in this time who was there as a colonizer, just keep word, to convert people. What is the word I'm looking for? Thank you, a missionary. Sorry, I ran out of words for a second. He's there as a missionary, and he wrote about chocolate that a lot of people liked it, but quote unquote, women went wild for it, which I thought was interesting. So it comes back to Europe and is fairly readily available by the middle of the 17th century, but it is a really special treat for most people, and if you're drinking it daily, you're very wealthy. This is a very wealthy, I believe, Dutch family. I do not know what's going on with that little girl's hair, other than, because I know you're thinking, other than that it was a big trend at that time, but if there's anyone out there who's like an expert in 17th century Dutch clothing, I would love to hear more details. Come see me after the talk. Notice what they've got in front of them, because chocolate changes from the simple drink of the ground hot chocolate cacao nibs mixed with water and flavorings. It's the Spanish who add dairy to it. It's the Spanish who add things like sugar and cinnamon and nutmeg and all those spices. What we think of as Mexican hot chocolate now isn't Mexican hot chocolate, it is Spanish hot chocolate that then made the trip back to Mexico. But that is not how the drink was prepared by indigenous people. And because chocolate was mostly for rich people, because it was super expensive, they invented all kinds of, I stopped myself from swearing, things to spend money on, because when you're that rich, you need something to do. So you buy stuff. So we'll come back to this. We invented all the accessories of all different shapes and sizes, which one of the things I like about the chocolate exhibit downstairs, you can go see some of this crap that they like made up and all its different shapes and sizes and varieties. And you were like, you know, to be truly social, you had to blah, blah, blah. You had to have all this stuff here. And we have documentation of this being used. This is a really cool document by a woman named Lady Anne Fanshawe. Her husband was an ambassador to the Spanish court in the middle of the 17th century. The earliest ice cream recipe known is written in her hand. That ice cream recipe, by the way, is not flavored with vanilla. It's flavored with ambergris. And if you don't know what that is, oh, good, you do. Great. You can look that up on my blog, too. It's really weird. But you can see she made a little drawing, too. She had chocolate for the first time, and she drew the little chocolate pot, which is also, it's on top in this image, too, which was designed especially for chocolate. But she also drew a molinillo, too. And this is something else we associate with Mexican culture, but again, it's not indigenous. It was invented by the Spanish, because apparently they couldn't do this thing either. So with this object, yeah, I do have an image. You spin it in your hands and you use that to froth the chocolate instead. So there became this ritual around chocolate that was very appealing to people. And the reason the chocolate became really, really popular and desirable is because it was the first drink in Europe to be introduced to Europe that was caffeinated. So it predates, but only slightly, tea and coffee. And so it was a new sensation to be caffeinated. Yes, notice one, she's feeding it to her dog. Don't feed chocolate to your dog. But also, just an interesting detail that I'm curious about and haven't quite figured out the answers to. You'll see these very specific chocolate cups and saucers in the exhibit downstairs. The saucers are very, very deep. And in most of the images I see, they're of people pouring chocolate into the saucer and then drinking the chocolate out of the saucer. Indeed. I actually don't have a firm answer to you. What I suspect is the chocolate drink has both a lot of sediment and a lot of oil. Today, when we make bar chocolate, we separate out that cocoa butter, which is the fat, and then add a little bit back in and create a smooth chocolate. But when you make it from the cacao nib, it sort of just is, it's not, I actually wouldn't describe it as greasy, but there's definitely like oil on the top. So if you pour it out into the saucer, you're avoiding both the oil and the sediment at the same time. This is my theory. I have to do a little more asking around to figure it out, but it's something you'll notice in pictures. So, can you believe it? Time flies. Those are our 3 flavors. That is my social media handle right there, both on Instagram and Twitter. And I'm also on Facebook, because I've been trying to stay off it because it makes me anxious. And you're welcome to reach out to me at any time. That, of course, is my book. But before we leave here, we're going to take some questions from you. So there's people coming around with microphones. Stick your hands up, and they will decide. Did I answer all of your questions?
I have a question I can start with.
Okay.
Besides black pepper and vanilla, is there another one of the 8 flavors that when you're doing these talks you find to be the most interesting for you, or as you were writing the book that, you know, there was some really surprising fact about that you weren't able to address in tonight's program?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm going to answer that question in 2 ways, because there were 2 flavors that really surprised me. Those were actually soy sauce and garlic, because I picked them. When I selected these flavors, I looked at them not only at how much we use them, but also they very often clearly represented major cultural shifts in our country. So I was like, great, soy sauce, Chinese, we're going to talk about the Chinese Exclusion Act. Great, garlic, Italians, we're going to talk about Immigration Act 1924 and how everyone hated Italians. And then what surprised me is I actually didn't realize how much the racism against these 2 groups of people within that time period ran. So much so that we saw things like garlic to be emblematic of a resistance to American assimilation, and so would refuse to eat Italian food because we didn't want to be like Italians. And both soy sauce and garlic, Chinese and Italians were really thought of as undesirable, to the point where we created laws to ban them from coming to this country. We've done it before. You're probably not surprised. And I cover all this in the book, too. And the reason they become a part of American food is because of cultures we want to emulate. The Japanese come a little bit later and come in smaller numbers and also use soy sauce. And then garlic actually becomes a big part of American food because of the trend for Provençal, or Southern France cuisine, started by James Beard and then later carried on by Alice Waters. So we didn't take garlic with the Italians at the turn of the century. We took it with the trend for French food in the middle of the 20th century. that was a surprise to me because I just thought it had more to do with the gradual assimilation, but it was much more about who we really try to push away and who we don't want here, and which cultures we look up to and want to be like. So that for me was a big surprise, and that gives you a little glimpse into those 2 chapters. There is one chapter that I am particularly in love with, and I feel like even a little guilty at times because I feel like I favor this chapter and the main characters so much. My favorite chapter is the curry chapter, and it focuses on a chef who immigrated here in 1899. He's from what we would call today Pakistan. He's from Karachi, but at the time he would have self-identified as, well, I can't say what he would have self-identified on, but he came from India at the time. And this book is the first time that there has been any amount of research published about him, and that really astounded me, because when you begin to look down the rabbit hole, he was incredibly famous. The very first article about him, where he was cooking at a very big restaurant in New York, a very high dining restaurant, says, "A chef from India, women go wild for him." And the article, which I realize I don't really know was written by a man or a woman because there aren't bylines at the turn of the century, it just like, in the words of one of my friends, describes him as the foxiest man alive. So he's like this like smoking hot chef who's like super famous, gets married 3 times that I know of in America, tours the country, and he's Muslim. He's an Indian Muslim immigrant. So getting to uncover this story, I really, it's the most amount of primary source research I had to do in this book, and it's a story that I am always really excited to tell because I think it tells a different version of who an American is. And there is also a biography coming out about him eventually by a professor at MIT and scholar Vivek Bald, which to me is like more exciting than the next season of Game of Thrones. Like, I cannot wait to find out what happens. So there you go. There's the long answer to a short question.
Great, and we have the next question right up here in the center.
Hi, so I have 2 questions actually. One is, I want to know how you got into this, whether you came to this kind of research from the cooking side or from the history side or what. And my second question is there any dish that combines all 8 flavors?
Not yet, but you can work on that. No, that sounds horrific. Especially when you start throwing like MSG in there. Bleh. I'm gonna leave that to you. How did I get into this? Well, it was mentioned at the beginning that my first job as a working adult was I had a summer job working at a living history museum, which was, think along the lines of Plymouth Plantation, if you've been there. If you're from the Boston area, I'm sure you went there on a school trip. But we did Ohio in the 1840s, and I didn't think I liked history because when you're going through grade school, you were taught wars primarily. It's like colonization, Revolutionary War, Civil War, Great Depression, World War II, and then maybe you make it to Vietnam if you rush, right? So that's American history, and it was all about memorizing battles and why they happened and how many people died and all of that. And when I started working in living history, that history, especially because the year we did was 1848, the point was there wasn't a war. We had just ended a war, Mexican-American War, and we were leading up to the Civil War. And the museum concentrated on the politics of everyday life. And that was a new concept to me, to think about history as populated with people. People like us that were neither different than us nor perfect than us, that could be just as big a jerks as we are, or just as generous and kind and risk their lives for others. All those things, all those nuances had never occurred to me before. So that was a big change, but also within this museum, it was a big museum with multiple houses, and we cooked in the houses. So that was the first time I was introduced to food, and I realized that food tasted different in different time periods. I went to art school. I spent 5 years at the Cleveland Institute of Art, and I was always then fascinated with how we interpret history, how we strive to reenact and recreate and understand. And in my 5th year for my thesis project, I opened up a pop-up restaurant that served colonial era food to a contemporary audience. When I moved to New York, I started working for New York Magazine's blog Grub Street when they had just launched their website, which now seems bizarre. The website was brand new. And so then I got into the New York food scene and recognized that a lot of chefs were looking to the past for inspiration. But chefs weren't historians, and I learned that many historians didn't cook. And I just saw that there more communication needed to be happening there, but also here, that people were interested to know about where their food comes from, and that as soon as you're tasting, people were engaging and asking questions so that you can get into deeper stories. I launched my blog 8 years ago, and that is what has led to this moment here, right in front of you.
Next question to your left.
Hi. First of all, thank you for being open and sharing your anxiety with all of us.
I can't talk about it. I can't just push it down. I get heartburn.
It's important. My question is in a similar but different vein about food, politics, and economics. You mentioned the red peppercorn market falling out when people kind of realized that they weren't paying for anything special. When we go to the grocery store and look at these spices, we see different kind of tiers of the products. What kind of questions should we be asking ourselves, or what should we know about whether the name brand and the store brand is any different from that organic specialty spice?
Fair trade is always a great thing. But with certain commodities, it's difficult to do fair trade. Vanilla is one of them. Vanilla is really becoming more and more fraught. You might have noticed that vanilla prices have gone up recently. There's a really severe drought in Madagascar, which is affecting the crop. Not only that, but I was just noticing downstairs that a lot of small farm cacao producers in West Africa included dry their beans, and so they can be stored for months if they have to be. Vanilla doesn't work that way. It's ripe, you pick it. If you don't sell it to a curing house, it rots. So there are these brokers in between that are really users that are taking advantage of the people growing these crops. You have to accept the price they're offering, or you don't get any money at all. That's something that's being changed pretty remarkably in Mexico by the Gaias, who, by the way, if you're interested in their product, Nielsen Massey sells it under their Mexican vanilla label. Fair trade is difficult with vanilla producers. India has been pretty successful in organizing a fair trade vanilla industry. Fair trade is easier with chocolate, but on the other hand, not every company is fair trade that is also doing a good job. A friend of mine, a chocolate producer in Brooklyn, said basically, like, if you're buying a chocolate bar, turn it over, see there shouldn't be more than like 5 ingredients. One of them should be chocolate. That should be the first one. And oftentimes, smaller bean-to-bar brands, even if they aren't fair trade, will list exactly where their chocolate beans are coming from. And bean-to-bar means they have a personal relationship that is often based around ethics with the growers of that chocolate. So chocolate and vanilla are luxury commodities, and when we start trying to bring that price down, that is when we are gaining from other people's pain, essentially, and that's what's happening in these broad commercial industries. So that I suppose is the heavy ethical side. I'll just give you a tip that's a little more lighthearted, will make you feel better. When you buy vanilla beans in the grocery store, you buy 2 beans for $10, $15, something like that. An extraordinary amount of money because they are hand-grown, hand-produced. They're the third most expensive spice on the planet after saffron and cardamom. It changes places with cardamom sometimes. However, those are grade A vanilla beans, and grade A vanilla beans are graded by appearance. They're plump, they're straight, they look nice. And I say, who cares? Because you're gonna stab it and scrape its middle out and throw it in something. No one is looking at the vanilla bean by the time you cook with it. So you have your grade A bean, and you have your grade B bean, and then you often have a grade B, C, or split bean is what they're called. These grade B, C split beans were extra ripe when they were harvested, which means they have more of the chemicals that produce a stronger flavor, but they're ugly. They're split. Also broken beans, short beans go into the same sort of grade C pile. You can get on Amazon and buy grade B or C beans $10 for 25. And they are better for cooking because they have more flavor chemicals and less water. They're often a drier bean. And that's not even the tip I told you was going to buy you back the worth of the book. But that's a big one. Like vanilla growers are literally like, we don't know why chefs don't want these beans. They're a better product. They just look ugly. So in that case, you're really just being sold something on appearance, which has nothing to do with flavor in the case of a vanilla bean. Other questions?
Great. So we'll do the final question right here up in the center.
Okay. Is there a mic coming?
Hi, yeah.
Okay. Hi.
I feel like under pressure, like my question has to be really good. Thank you very much. So I had a question. I was just thinking, as an Indian growing up in Minnesota, I carried around hot sauce everywhere because the food tended to be very bland compared to the palate I had at home. So I was just thinking, when you were talking about all these flavors and talking about the history, do you also talk about why or where the flavors are in pockets of the country, and could you illuminate some of that?
Yes.
Because I'm like, why is none of it gotten to Minnesota yet? Just kidding. It's gotten a lot better, the food scene there.
I mean,
but
I
saying.
do have an answer for that, too, because I'm from Ohio, so we share similar kind of cultural history, and it just really has to do with the immigrant groups that arrived there first. In a way, we often forget about the sort of northern, upper Midwest Norse cultures that ended up there, where they're going to, like, bust out some, like, you know, some weird fermented salty fish at the holidays and be like, this is my heritage. And so in a way, I like to kind of mention them because they are a massive immigrant group that nobody ever talks about because they weren't on the coast, because they were in the Midwest. So it has to do in a way with the past. One of the things I wanted to do in this book, though, was, since there are so many pockets of different immigrant groups, different cuisines, different histories, I wanted to figure out what united all of these people, which is why I landed on this 8. Why is there a bottle of vanilla extract in, like, my, you know, Eastern European mom's refrigerator, pantry, but then also, like, someone whose family came from Vietnam, it now within a generation cooks with the same ingredient. So that is what I was striving for. But to talk about you and your hot sauce, poor girl, it will change, and it already has started changing. Because 200 years ago, black pepper was spicy. And then we started eating chili powder in the middle of the 19th century. Then we got way into curry in the early 20th century. And my last chapter is about sriracha hot sauce, which everyone thinks is imported, but is in fact made entirely in Irwindale, California, about 40 minutes outside of downtown LA, by a Vietnamese refugee. So I know hot sauce isn't among the top accomplishments brought to us by refugees, but it is a really good one. And the story of the man who invented it, David Tran, to me is a quintessential American story of someone coming here with their family, escaping disaster at home, and giving something to this country, becoming a part of it wholeheartedly. And yet, these are the people that we'd like to keep out of this country, which makes me both angry and sad at the same time. All that being said, spice is biological, and it's addictive. When we eat spicy food, it actually trips the same sensors in our mouth. They're called TRPV1, and they are the same ones that get tripped when we drink something that's too hot. And so it sets off this panic in our brain. We're like, it's hot, what are we gonna do? And the brain's like, don't worry, I think it's something. And then it releases endorphins. And endorphins make us feel good. And so there's something bad happening, so the brain's like, it's going to be okay, it's going to be okay. But then when nothing bad actually happens, when we're fine after we eat the spicy food, we want to do it again. It's like riding a roller coaster, literally. It's the same chemicals being released. It's safe scariness. And so that's an addictive experience. Endorphins are addictive. You want to do it again and again with spicier and spicier food. So that is one big factor, but there was a big study done with Cornell that discovered that a lot of these spices, everything from black pepper to chili peppers, are antimicrobials. You could clean your kitchen counters with sriracha if you wanted to. It kills about 99.9% of all the microbes it comes into contact with. And there's also some sort of ethnobotanical theory that people who like spicy food were healthier because they were eating food before refrigeration that had less microbes in it, that wouldn't kill them or make them sick. And then they lived longer and had more children, and those children grew up liking spicy food. So there might also be another sort of biological preference for our love of spicy food. So maybe Minnesotan food is not hot enough for you yet, but give it 50 years. Because your fine family, all the amazing people that have come from Southeast Asia, from the East, from all the parts, from the Caribbean, who are making our foods hotter and hotter and hotter, for our children, for the next generation, they won't need the hot sauce. It'll be in every single table in every single restaurant in this country. Climate? Is that what you said? Yes. This is frustrating you a lot, I can tell. Yes. If you look at where spicy food is from, it is from areas around the Caribbean where there would be more microbes growing in food because you can't keep it, you can't refrigerate it. But now we in the north, up here in Boston, like it too because the experience of eating it becomes addictive. So it doesn't matter now if you live in the Caribbean or not, because if you live in the Caribbean, you also have a refrigerator. So we've sort of surpassed that original idea of why we have this biological preference, and we've moved, in a sense, into pure enjoyment of hot sauce. So that's the last question, right? That's the last question. What we're going to do now is I'm going to get whisked away. I'm going to sign your books. If you didn't get to ask me, you can ask me after, right?
Yay!
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Sarah. That was
My pleasure.
so enlightening and fun.